Has denied her involvement in this horrific crime. She has had 3 children. 1 is in foster care, another with family. The 3rd is dead.
Catherine White.
Catherine White stood before a judge for the first time, a mother accused.
I miss my granddaughter very, very much, and I do want justice for my granddaughter. The charges against my daughter, I feel, are something that she didn't do, something that she was not involved in.
She was barely the size of a loaf of bread. Her tiny hands still curled like she'd never left the womb. Her eyes, when they opened, couldn't focus for long. But one thing was clear to the doctors in that ER. This wasn't an accident. Something had gone terribly wrong. What they found next sent nurses to the hallway in tears. Marks no infant should have, injuries no one could explain, and damage far beyond what a baby coming home should ever face. There was no crash, no fall. No tragic misstep. This was intentional, and yet, no one was arrested, not that day. Why? That's what we're unpacking today. A case of missed warnings, silent alarms, and a little girl who fought through 2 months of life only to spend her final hours in agony without anyone to protect her. But this story doesn't end where it should. Because someone posted about her birthday like nothing happened. Someone walked free for months. And the system, once again, failed to act in time. Before we continue, I need to give you a heartfelt warning. Today's case involves a newborn and includes emotional subject matter some may find distressing. While no graphic descriptions are included, the events may still be upsetting. If this is your first time here, welcome. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And to our amazing community, especially the men and women who return week after week to demand justice and raise awareness, you are the reason this channel exists. Every share, every comment, every like is a voice for the voiceless. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you believe these stories matter, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because what happens in this case doesn't just haunt us. It reminds us why these stories must be told. Carefully, respectfully, and with purpose. Jasmine Rose Robin was born on April 30th, 2018, in Houston, Texas. She arrived 11 weeks earlier than expected. Her weight at birth was just under 3 pounds, 2 pounds, 15 ounces. Her lungs were still developing, and her body couldn't yet regulate its own temperature. From the moment she entered the world, she was medically fragile. She was immediately admitted to the neonatal intensive care unit at Memorial Hermann. Over the next 2 months, Jasmine remained under 24-hour observation. Machines regulated her breathing. Tubes delivered her nutrition. Nurses monitored her vitals through the night. It was an environment of careful management, where progress was measured in heartbeats and every ounce gained was cause for guarded relief. Despite the risks, Jasmine showed signs of resilience. Day by day, her condition stabilized. She came off oxygen. Her feedings improved. Doctors noted that while she remained delicate, she was meeting key developmental benchmarks for a baby born at just 29 weeks gestation. Her parents, Jason Robin Jr., age 24, and Catherine White, age 21, were present during her NICU stay. Staff reported that they visited frequently. Jason even recorded video clips of Jasmine's early days, later posted to his Facebook page. In one of the videos, he wrote about how proud he was of her strength, calling her a little fighter. Publicly, there were no red flags. What observers saw was a young couple who appeared to be doing their best in a difficult situation. During her final evaluations, doctors cleared Jasmine for discharge. She had reached a stable weight. Her body was functioning without intensive support. And on July 3, 2018, after spending the first 72 days of her life inside a hospital incubator, Jasmine was released into the care of her parents. For a child born with so many early complications, surviving those first 2 months should have marked a turning point, a shift from constant medical oversight to a quieter life at home. Jasmine had survived her toughest battle. But no one realized it hadn't even begun. In March 2018, just weeks before Jasmine was born, an anonymous call was made to Child Protective Services. The tipster reported that Jason Robin Jr. had physically harmed the couple's 2-year-old son. The same report alleged that Catherine White had pinched the child in areas that would be hidden by clothing. According to the caller, the boy showed visible signs of injury, marks on his stomach, arms, legs, and back. CPS opened a case, but when investigators attempted to contact the family, they couldn't find them. Neither parent responded to communication attempts. No current address was confirmed, and no follow-up visit was conducted. As a result, the case was closed without further action. The file stated that both parents were uncooperative and unreachable. In April 2018, 1 month after that report, Jason was arrested by local authorities on a felony charge for evading law enforcement. He was taken into custody but later released. No connection was made at the time between this arrest and the open CPS investigation. No welfare check was triggered. No cross-agency alert followed. The system registered 2 red flags within 4 weeks, yet no protective intervention occurred. Fast forward to July 10, 2018. Jasmine had been home for 1 week. Her parents brought her to a pediatric appointment. The pediatrician who examined Jasmine on July 10, 2018, noticed visible discoloration around both of her eyes, marks that were not typical for a newborn, especially one recently discharged from intensive care. The bruising appeared abnormal and raised immediate concern. Without drawing conclusions, the physician carefully documented the findings and advised Jason and Catherine to take Jasmine to the emergency room for further evaluation. The recommendation was clear. What the doctor observed warranted urgent attention from specialists. They didn't. No ER visit was documented that day. No follow-up was made by the parents. The pediatrician's concerns were noted in Jasmine's medical file. A few days later, a family friend staying with the couple noticed something alarming. According to his later interview with investigators, Jasmine had experienced a choking episode that left her momentarily unresponsive. He claimed to have urged Catherine and Jason to take her to the hospital immediately. The response he received was indifference. The friend told authorities that Catherine said she was exhausted and needed to sleep. The situation, as he described it, was brushed off. Jasmine remained at home. The timeline is important. Within the span of 4 months, 3 separate intervention points surfaced: the CPS report, Jason's arrest, the pediatrician's recommendation. All of them, individually, raised cause for further observation. Together, they presented a clear pattern, a trail of missed opportunities that never connected. By July 11th, Jasmine was still not taken to the emergency room. The friend who had spoken up had done what many in his position might have done. He deferred to the parents, assuming they would know what to do. There was no emergency call, no follow-through. It's not just that the system didn't act, it's that each step assumed someone else would. And just 4 days after the pediatrician warned them, Jasmine's condition would take a critical turn. What investigators found next reframed everything. If this story already feels important, take a moment to subscribe, because what happens after this is what should have been prevented. On the morning of July 14, 2018, Jason Robin Jr. and Catherine White arrived at the emergency department of Pearland Memorial Hermann Hospital with their infant daughter, Jasmine. According to their statements to staff, the baby had been experiencing convulsions and had gone limp during the early morning hours. They claimed to have performed CPR before deciding to bring her in. Emergency physicians began evaluating Jasmine immediately. She was pale, unresponsive, and showed no signs of active reflex. A rapid assessment revealed swelling on her head. Her condition was quickly escalated. A pediatric trauma response was activated, and multiple teams converged to stabilize her. As the scans were reviewed, concern among medical staff deepened. Jasmine showed no detectable brain activity. The team initiated life support and ordered additional imaging to determine the extent of her neurological condition. One staff member who was present would later recall that several nurses quietly left the room after reviewing her scans, unable to process what they had seen. Among the findings noted by the hospital team were abnormalities in her eye tissue, consistent with pressure changes or disruption of normal oxygen flow. A CT scan confirmed that her brain had suffered significant internal damage. Her pupils did not respond to light. Neurological specialists were called in to review her status. Despite aggressive interventions, there was no improvement. The medical team conducted multiple tests over the next 24 hours to determine whether any function could be restored. Each time, the results remained unchanged. By the afternoon of July 15th, doctors confirmed that Jasmine had no signs of neurological function. She was officially pronounced deceased. The hospital immediately contacted law enforcement and reported the findings. The ER documentation noted the presence of injuries that were inconsistent with natural causes. The attending physician submitted a report requesting a full investigation into Jasmine's condition, citing the need for further evaluation by forensic specialists. From a procedural standpoint, every step taken by the hospital that day followed protocol. But internally, those who were there described the atmosphere as heavy. Staff who had cared for Jasmine during her NICU stay now found themselves facing her under far different circumstances. One nurse later told investigators, "She had just gone home. She was doing better. We don't understand." The emergency room had seen its share of trauma, but this case left a quiet mark. Jasmine had entered their care once as a premature infant struggling for stability and returned just 11 days later under circumstances no one could reconcile. And yet, despite what they saw, no one was arrested that night. Following the hospital's report to law enforcement, an investigation into Jasmine's condition was formally opened. The findings from the emergency room had raised immediate questions, but when police spoke with Jasmine's parents, Jason Robin Jr. and Catherine White, no arrests were made. Jason told investigators that he had fed Jasmine around 2 o'clock that morning. According to his statement, she initially refused the bottle, but eventually began feeding. Moments later, he claimed she became unresponsive. He said he performed CPR until she regained some movement, and afterwards she fell asleep. He described this as unusual, but said they didn't think it was serious enough to warrant an emergency call at that time. It wasn't until Jasmine refused 2 more feedings later that day and appeared unusually quiet, he said, that they decided to bring her to the hospital. That decision would come nearly 12 hours after the initial episode he described. During questioning, Jason also revealed that this wasn't the first time he and Catherine had performed CPR on Jasmine. He admitted that a similar incident occurred approximately a week earlier. At that time, Jasmine had allegedly choked during a feeding. They were able to revive her, but chose not to seek medical attention. When asked why they didn't call for help, Jason told investigators they were afraid that Child Protective Services might intervene. This admission raised further concerns. A newborn exhibiting repeated respiratory distress, twice in 1 week, would typically require immediate medical attention. But instead of seeking help, the couple chose to handle the matter privately. There was no medical documentation, no follow-up, no alerts were made. As detectives began to gather background on the family, more details came to light. Both Jason and Catherine had a prior history with CPS. In internal case notes later reviewed as part of the investigation, both parents had acknowledged previous drug use. A court-ordered screening at the time of Jason's arrest confirmed the presence of multiple controlled substances in his system. In a recorded statement, Jason described Jasmine's crying as difficult for him to handle. He said it would trigger a physical reaction, explaining that it made his ears ring to Kingdom Come. He acknowledged that her crying made him agitated, but insisted that he had never intended to cause harm. The details were deeply concerning to investigators, not only for what was said, but for what was omitted. The timeline Jason provided conflicted with medical indicators noted by hospital staff. His responses offered little clarity on how Jasmine's condition could have worsened so drastically without someone noticing sooner. Still, despite the inconsistencies in his account and the earlier concerns raised by medical professionals, no charges were filed at that point. Investigators continued to collect evidence. Forensic analysis was pending. CPS and law enforcement agencies began working together, but the case was in its early stages. Procedurally, more confirmation was needed before any legal action could move forward. If you've made it this far, you understand why stories like Jasmine's can't be ignored. Subscribe to stay informed, because what follows is where justice begins to take shape. The final autopsy in the case of Jasmine Rose Robin was completed on May 23, 2019, 10 months after her death. The report was extensive and methodical, reflecting a careful review by forensic medical experts. It revealed a pattern of harm that could not be explained by a single incident. The autopsy revealed a concerning pattern. Dozens of fractures across her body, some recent, others older, pointing to repeated trauma over time. The report also noted damage to her skull and internal complications that affected her brain. Medical examiners found signs of both recent and healing injuries, indicating that whatever had happened to Jasmine had not occurred all at once, but over a period of time. Additionally, the examination detailed evidence within her eyes, consistent with the head trauma specialists had suspected during her ER evaluation. The conclusion was clear. This was not accidental. The cause was attributed to cumulative force. Once the autopsy was finalized, the case moved swiftly. The Harris County District Attorney, Kim Ogg, filed charges based on the comprehensive medical findings and timeline. In a public statement, Ogg said, "The evidence shows that Jasmine fell victim to the very people who were supposed to protect her. After a full and thorough investigation, we have filed charges and we will seek justice for Jasmine." On June 24, 2019, Jason Robin Jr. was arrested and charged with capital murder. The charge reflected the seriousness of the findings and the belief by prosecutors that Jasmine's injuries were not only preventable, but intentional. The following morning, on June 25th, Catherine White was taken into custody. She was charged with injury to a child by omission, a charge that reflected the prosecution's stance that she had failed to act when it mattered most. At Jason's bond hearing, the court denied his release. He was remanded to Harris County Jail to await trial. Catherine was granted bond and released after posting $40,000. The decision to allow her release drew mixed reactions from those familiar with the case, especially among family members who had been following the investigation from the beginning. Jasmine's grandparents on her father's side, Micah Robin and Jason Robin Sr., spoke openly about their grief and the complexity of their emotions. Micah, Jason Jr.'s mother, told reporters that she still struggled to reconcile what had happened. Despite her doubts, she acknowledged that accountability was necessary. Jason Sr., Jasmine's grandfather, was more direct. He called for justice, regardless of who was responsible. He described the loss of Jasmine as something the entire family was still trying to process, especially because of how much time they had spent visiting her during her stay in the NICU. For them, the arrest did not bring closure. It brought questions. Prosecutors began assembling a timeline based on hospital records, CPS documentation, and witness interviews. The focus was on proving that the harm Jasmine endured had occurred while she was in the care of her parents, and that warning signs had been ignored or dismissed. Catherine's family maintained that she had not caused harm to her daughter and that she had not known the extent of Jasmine's condition. They supported her during her release on bond and continued to assert that her role was not one of intent, but of inaction. The charges against both parents marked a turning point in the case. What had started as a confusing medical emergency was now a criminal matter, backed by months of forensic evidence and legal scrutiny. The investigation had moved from the emergency room to the courtroom. The question now was not just what had happened to Jasmine, but who would be held responsible. But this case wouldn't end with arrests. It would stretch on for years, and only one of them would face the consequences. In June 2023, almost 5 years after Jasmine's case was first opened, Jason Robin Jr. appeared before a Harris County judge and entered a plea of guilty. The charge, murder. No trial was held. No witnesses were called. It was a negotiated resolution that closed one chapter of a long-standing investigation. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Jason accepted a 45-year prison sentence. According to Texas guidelines, he must serve at least half of that term before becoming eligible for parole. The plea also came with a requirement: Jason agreed to provide testimony in the prosecution of Catherine White, should her case proceed to trial. Prosecutors stated that without the plea, they would have pursued a more severe sentence. But Jason's cooperation, particularly in offering direct testimony, allowed the district attorney's office to focus efforts on the second defendant in the case. As of 2025, Catherine White has not gone to trial. Her attorneys maintain that she had no direct role in the harm Jasmine endured and was unaware of the severity of her daughter's condition. Prosecutors allege that her inaction, when intervention might have made a difference, constitutes legal responsibility. The charge she faces is based not on conduct, but on omission. Following Jason's conviction, Jasmine's younger sibling, born in April 2019, was placed in the custody of Jason's parents, Micah Robin and Jason Robin Sr. Hospital officials, aware of the open criminal investigation, coordinated with state authorities to ensure the child's placement with relatives immediately upon release. The child has remained in the care of family since. Privately, the grandparents kept a few items that reminded them of Jasmine. Her lavender blanket, decorated with soft butterfly prints, was carefully folded and preserved. Her ashes were placed in 2 identical silver pendants, each worn daily by Micah and Jason Sr. They said it was their way of holding on to her memory while continuing to seek answers. On what would have been Jasmine's first birthday, Jason posted publicly on Facebook. In the post, he wrote that Jasmine had fulfilled her purpose and that God needed her back. The message sparked frustration among some family members, who felt the language ignored the seriousness of the situation. Micah shared her own internal conflict in a brief statement. "I miss my granddaughter very much, and I want accountability. If my son was responsible, he needs to face that." Jason echoed that view. He said that while they had not stopped loving their son, they would not ignore what had happened. The legal proceedings brought clarity, but not resolution. Jason's plea closed one part of the case, but left many questions unanswered. Catherine's legal future remained undecided, and for the family, the weight of what had occurred lingered. Justice came, but only for one parent, and for Jasmine, it didn't come soon enough. If you believe change begins with awareness, help us share her story. There were no major policy changes following Jasmine's case. No procedural reforms. No public statements from the agencies involved to acknowledge what was missed or to outline what would be done differently moving forward. For many watching from the outside, it was as if the system returned to business as usual. But within the details of Jasmine's case are warning signs that can't be ignored, especially by those entrusted with the care of young children. The red flags weren't hidden. They were visible, documented, raised by professionals. And yet, the cycle was allowed to continue because no single moment triggered a meaningful intervention. What happened to Jasmine wasn't just a failure of one person or even one agency. It was a breakdown in how child protection systems work when multiple concerns surface at different points, but no one connects them. Across the United States, thousands of reports are filed every day with Child Protective Services. Many are legitimate, some are not. And in many cases, families under review move, change contact information, or avoid follow-up visits. When that happens, investigations are often closed, but closed does not mean resolved. Jasmine's case reminds us of what can slip through the cracks when there's no second attempt. No cross-reference. No coordination between reports that may on their own seem minor, but together paint a much larger picture. What makes this harder is that not all warning signs are dramatic. Sometimes it's a baby who suddenly won't eat, or a parent who cancels a medical appointment without rescheduling. It might be a child who seems quieter than usual, or a sibling with bruises that are explained away. These aren't always cause for alarm, but they are cause for attention. And attention is where change begins. If a pediatrician recommends a hospital visit, go. If a caregiver is unsure about a symptom, ask. If something feels off, say something. You don't need certainty to make a report. You only need concern. Reports can be made anonymously, and in many cases, one concerned voice is enough to prompt a visit that could make all the difference. This case also reminds us that some situations don't look dangerous until it's too late. That's why communities, especially those working in early childhood services, need more training, better communication tools, and stronger collaboration with agencies like CPS, law enforcement, and healthcare providers. Parents, relatives, teachers, doctors, neighbors all play a role in recognizing when something might be wrong. Because the reality is, not all danger looks the same. Sometimes there are no obvious injuries. Sometimes the people involved are known, trusted, even loved. And that makes it harder to see the signs or accept them when they appear. Jasmine's case challenges us to do more than feel sadness. It calls for awareness, responsibility, and change. Because a child being sent home after surviving the NICU should be a moment of hope, not the beginning of a countdown no one sees coming. Jasmine's story is more than a warning. It's a responsibility, one we all share. If you made it this far, thank you. Share this video, leave a comment, stay engaged, because the next child might not survive 2 months unless someone steps in. Thank you for always being here and for remembering these little ones taken far too soon. We'll see you in the next video.
She died because she was overheated. She was cooked. I know she died very quickly after her temperature reached 107 or 108.
At one point, the microwave from Arnold's Parkside apartment was wheeled in, and Robert Schiffman, an expert on the appliance, explained why Paris's burns were concentrated on her back.
Microwave energy in this case comes from up here.
Now, the trial is scheduled to resume tomorrow morning at 8:30. Of course, stay with 2 News on air and online at WDTN.com, and we'll keep you posted on any new developments. Reporting live, Megan O'Rourke, 2 News on your side.
She was only 28 days old, barely long enough to smile. By the time paramedics arrived, something was wrong. But it wasn't because of the weather. It was something far more serious. That morning, the home was quiet. Unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you stop and listen, because something feels off, but you don't know what yet. The mother lay still on the couch, unresponsive. The baby was nearby. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. And when they checked on her, it became clear something had gone terribly wrong. Medical professionals quickly realized this was no ordinary emergency. The cause wasn't natural, and it wasn't random. What they found would become one of the most unusual and unsettling cases Dayton had ever seen. This was intentional. The signs, the condition, and something even the seasoned nurse at intake couldn't ignore. A faint, out-of-place odor that clung to the child's clothing. Detectives would later say they had never encountered a case so calculated and so personal. Not just because of how it happened, but because of who was responsible and why. This is a story of betrayal in its rawest form. A young mother, an argument over fidelity, and a decision that left even hardened jurors stunned. But what if I told you she almost avoided accountability? Before we continue, this case involves sensitive circumstances that may be uncomfortable for some viewers. We've taken care to share this story with respect and responsibility while avoiding unnecessary detail. To those of you watching for the first time, thank you for being here. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It truly helps us connect with this growing community. And to our amazing subscribers, your support means more than you know. Every like, every comment, every share has helped us shine a light on these often overlooked stories. You've helped grow a movement, not just a channel. Now let's step into the case of Paris Talley, the baby who never had a chance, and the courtroom that nearly failed her. By the final days of August 2005, pressure inside the home on Lorenz Avenue was building. China Arnold and Terrell Talley were involved in a relationship that had become increasingly volatile. Arguments were frequent, accusations came easily, and one subject seemed to resurface more than any other: paternity. According to later testimony, Terrell had begun questioning whether Paris was truly his biological daughter. He cited rumors, people in the neighborhood, whispers from mutual acquaintances. He believed China had been involved with someone else during her time at Sinclair Community College. China, in turn, rejected those claims. She countered with accusations of her own, alleging that Terrell was the one who had been unfaithful. Specifically, she pointed to a woman who lived just a few doors down. Both denied wrongdoing, but neither fully trusted the other. The friction between them was not isolated. It was constant. On August 29, 2005, they made a decision to leave their children in the care of Terrell's sister, Leonda. They told her they needed a break, a few hours to themselves. They went to a nearby park and brought along a bottle of high-proof alcohol, reportedly Bacardi 151. What began as casual conversation turned tense. The tone shifted quickly. The conversation that started in quiet turned into another argument, one that followed them home. They returned around 10 p.m. According to Leonda, the children were safe and resting. She specifically remembered checking on Paris around midnight. Nothing appeared unusual. The infant was sleeping, and Leonda noticed no signs of anything out of the ordinary. But in the hours that followed, the evening took a different turn. At approximately 4 a.m., a neighbor reported seeing China outside the apartment. She was alone, standing on the porch, silent. The street was quiet. No words were spoken. She appeared distracted, lost in thought, or perhaps trying to process something privately. Terrell arrived home minutes later. In his later testimony, he said he found China on the living room couch. He said she appeared to be sleeping. Near her, he saw Paris in her car seat. He believed she was asleep too. There was no sound, no crying, no sign of distress, and the hours between midnight and morning would become the foundation of the investigation that followed. Investigators would later examine every decision, every movement, and every contradiction made during that window. When Paris was brought to Dayton Children's Medical Center in the early hours of the morning, medical staff immediately recognized that her condition was critical. The infant showed no signs of life, and her physical state raised urgent concern. From the moment she arrived, the focus shifted from routine care to something more serious. Dr. William Mitre was one of the first physicians to evaluate her. His attention wasn't just on the child, it was also on the behavior of the adult who brought her in. According to Mitre's later testimony, China Arnold did not appear visibly distressed. She reportedly asked, "My baby's burned?" a question that struck the medical staff as unusual under the circumstances. When emergency staff encounter unexplained events involving an infant, standard protocol requires that law enforcement be contacted immediately. The team followed those procedures. Officers from the Dayton Police Department arrived on scene and began collecting preliminary information from the staff and those present. According to medical personnel and investigators, China's responses during these initial interactions were calm, but notably limited in emotional range. She provided no clear insight into what may have caused the emergency and offered no explanations that matched what professionals were observing. When detectives sat down with her later that same day, China said that she had placed Paris in a car seat near the couch before falling asleep. She explained that she had been drinking alcohol the night before and had passed out, unaware of anything unusual. She said that when she woke up, the child was not moving, and that she had no knowledge of what had occurred during the night. She denied doing anything that could have caused harm and made no admissions of responsibility. Her account was vague but consistent in one key point. She maintained that she simply didn't know what had happened. Police brought her in for questioning later that day. They took statements, verified timelines, and compared her version of events against what they had learned from hospital staff. But without physical evidence or eyewitness accounts, they lacked the legal grounds to hold her further. By that afternoon, China Arnold was released. At that time, there were no lab results, no conclusive forensic findings, no surveillance footage or digital records linking anyone to an act of wrongdoing. Law enforcement couldn't move forward based on suspicion alone. The case was still in its earliest stage. But even as she walked out of the building, investigators had already begun the quiet process of gathering everything they needed. They reviewed medical files, requested internal reports from the emergency team, and started mapping out who was in the apartment that night and what each of them may have seen or heard. This first round of interviews and observations would later become the framework for the deeper investigation to come. And through these interviews, investigators would later determine that Paris likely passed away sometime between 1:30 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. that morning, though the exact time could not be pinpointed. Though little was said publicly about this in those early hours, but behind the scenes, the foundation of the case was already taking shape. The confirmation that Paris passed away from internal heat injuries narrowed the investigation significantly and shaped the direction detectives would take from that point forward. There was no video footage, no eyewitnesses, and no clear forensic evidence tying anyone to Paris Talley's death. Investigators were left with inconsistent statements and unanswered questions, but they sensed something didn't add up. The real breakthrough came in May 2006, nearly 9 months after Paris's death. Investigators returned to the apartment for a fresh look, re-examining every object in the home. A seemingly ordinary appliance, the microwave, drew their focus. Forensic teams swabbed its interior and sent the samples for advanced DNA testing. Weeks later, the results came back. Partial traces of Paris's DNA were found on the inner ceiling of the microwave. Investigators later concluded that Paris had been subjected to extreme heat inside the microwave, and the exposure proved fatal. This was found to have happened shortly after an argument between China Arnold and her boyfriend, Terrell Talley, over whether he was Paris's biological father. Prosecutors stated it was a sudden act of anger, one that would shape the direction of the entire case. This evidence, while not conclusive on its own, opened a critical new path. Detectives sought the expertise of Dr. Marcela Fierro, a renowned forensic pathologist experienced in heat-related cases. She confirmed that the findings were consistent with internal heating injuries seen in similar incidents. To strengthen their case, investigators commissioned a controlled laboratory test using animal tissue. The results mirrored the injuries observed in Paris's case, supporting the theory that the microwave had been used deliberately. With each piece of evidence, the DNA traces, the forensic analysis, and the experimental results, the case moved from speculation to confirmation. What had begun as a medical mystery now pointed to an intentional act. For detectives, the puzzle was finally coming together, and the weight of accountability was clear. This was no longer about what might have happened. It was about what the evidence was quietly, methodically, and relentlessly proving. On November 27, 2006, more than a year after the investigation began, China Arnold was formally taken into custody. At that point, forensic results had come in, timelines had shifted, and investigators believed they had the framework to move forward. She was booked into Montgomery County Jail, where she would remain while awaiting trial. It was inside that facility, behind concrete walls and routine schedules, that a different kind of information surfaced. It didn't come from a detective or a forensic lab. It came from someone who was simply watching and listening from the next bunk over. Linda Williams was assigned to the same housing unit as China Arnold. Over the course of several months, between late 2006 and early 2008, the two women spent countless hours in the same confined space. According to Williams, they formed a special rapport. It started as casual conversation, but as time passed, the subject changed. Williams later testified that during one of their many private discussions, China spoke about the night that led to her arrest. She allegedly described a fight with her boyfriend, Terrell Talley. According to Williams, China said she felt betrayed, overwhelmed, and that she reacted out of anger after consuming alcohol. What followed, she claimed, was a decision that spiraled beyond anything she could have imagined. The statement wasn't part of an official interview. It wasn't prompted by investigators. It came in a setting where there were no microphones, no transcripts, and no attorneys. Just two individuals passing time. Williams described it not as a confession in the traditional sense, but as an admission, quiet, personal, and laced with regret. The confession remained private until just before Arnold's first trial in February 2008. That's when Linda Williams was called to testify. She provided her statement under oath, and it was added to the prosecution's case file. What made this testimony significant was not only its content, but its context. Williams had no prior connection to the case. She wasn't offered a plea deal. She wasn't granted early release. Prosecutors stated clearly that she came forward of her own volition, with no promise of benefit. China Arnold, through her legal team, denied the conversation ever took place. She maintained that no such remarks were made, and that the account was either a misunderstanding or a fabrication. Her attorneys questioned the reliability of inmate testimony, a known gray area in criminal proceedings.
Any mother could sit there and put their baby in the microwave for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and just sit there. This case has unanswered questions, and it might have unanswered questions because they've charged the wrong person. And my argument to you isn't that China Arnold's not guilty because they can't prove it. My argument to you is China Arnold's not guilty because she's innocent. Innocent. China Arnold is innocent of these charges.
Even so, for investigators and prosecutors, Linda Williams became a vital part of the case. Her version of events supported a theory of emotional escalation. It introduced motive and clarified behavior that, until then, had remained ambiguous. It also reinforced elements of the timeline that law enforcement had been constructing for months. By early 2008, the case against China Arnold had moved from private investigation to public judgment. After years of mounting evidence, quiet interviews, and forensic evaluations, the prosecution brought its argument to court. But what unfolded next showed that even in a courtroom, certainty can still unravel. The first trial opened in February 2008. Prosecutors presented their evidence with confidence. They leaned on DNA analysis, expert interpretation, and statements collected over the course of more than a year. But just as the case was beginning to take shape, a new voice entered the scene. A 5-year-old relative of the family. This child, introduced through the defense, claimed that it wasn't China who had caused harm to Paris, but rather a neighborhood boy. The statement was vague. There were no specific details and no context that explained how such a thing could have happened. But it was enough to raise doubt. The judge declared a mistrial. The jury was dismissed. The courtroom emptied without resolution. Later that same year, prosecutors initiated a second trial. This time, they focused more sharply. The goal was clarity, stripping away ambiguity and grounding the case in verified evidence. The forensic timeline, physical findings, and China's own statements became the pillars of the prosecution's case. The defense argued that China had been drinking heavily that night and that her actions were not the result of a calculated decision, but of impaired judgment. They said the emotional state she was in, combined with alcohol, made her incapable of deliberate intent. Despite these claims, the jury returned a clear verdict: guilty. The court sentenced her to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But the story didn't end there. In 2010, an appeals court reviewed the second trial and determined that a critical error had occurred. The defense had attempted to introduce a key witness, someone who might have influenced the jury's view of the timeline. But that testimony had been blocked. The conviction was overturned, and a third trial was ordered. In May 2011, that final trial began. This time, the full list of witnesses was allowed. The case once again returned to familiar ground: scientific evidence, timelines, emotional escalation. But the courtroom felt different. The stakes had shifted. The outcome now carried the weight of multiple years of litigation and 2 prior verdicts. Once again, China Arnold was found guilty of aggravated murder. The prosecution had initially sought the maximum sentence, but the jury declined that request. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole for a second time.
Dayton mother accused of killing her baby in a microwave oven could still face the death penalty. Good evening. I'm Mark Allen.
I'm Michelle Kingsfield. That ruling came down just hours ago and means China Arnold may pay with her life if she's convicted. Sonu Wasu was in court and is live with breaking reaction from Arnold's family. Sonu?
Well, Mark, Michelle, China Arnold's family is still celebrating the fact that her last conviction was thrown out by an appeals court, and they're hoping that this time around it will be the same. Now, China Arnold appeared before the judge in a long black skirt and white turtleneck this afternoon. She smiled at her family and was soft-spoken but appeared to be in good spirits. She told Judge Mary Wiseman that she was happy with her defense attorneys. The issue pending before the judge today was whether prosecutors could ask for the death penalty in the third trial against China Arnold. And the judge said, after reviewing all the arguments and studying previous U.S. Supreme Court decisions, that the death penalty would apply. We spoke to Arnold's mother right after the hearing. Here's what she had to say.
We're still hopeful. We are waiting to find out what's going to happen, and we'll see come April 25th.
How's China holding up?
She's pretty good. Her spirits are good. We're very happy. We keep her happy. So.
Now, China Arnold's third trial for the murder of baby Paris Talley will start on April 25th. There will be 1 week of jury selection, and we're told the trial is expected to last for 1 week. Reporting live downtown, Sonu Wasu, 2 News on your side.
In 2014, Arnold's legal team filed one last appeal, this time to the Ohio Supreme Court. They requested a full review, arguing that procedural issues had tainted the process. The court declined to hear the case. All legal paths had been exhausted. 3 trials, 2 convictions, 1 sentence that would never be lifted. What set this case apart wasn't just what happened behind closed doors, but what never happened outside them. No alerts were filed with protective services. No welfare checks. Not a single hotline call from family, neighbors, or professionals. Despite multiple children in the home, a criminal history, prior justice system contact, and an unstable relationship, no agency intervened. In Ohio, as in many states, child welfare services require a formal referral to act. Without a report, even clear risk factors may go unchecked. Paris Talley was not enrolled in support programs, no pediatrician flagged concerns, and no mandated reporter raised alarms. Perhaps most troubling, after the case concluded, nothing changed. No new laws, no reforms, no added guidelines. That silence after the fact became as devastating as the silence before it. Today, this case is studied as a lesson in the difference between visible harm and hidden risk, reminding us that the most urgent failures are often about what no one did when they could have acted. If this has opened your eyes to how quiet some failures can be, take a moment now to subscribe. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for reform. And the more people who understand them, the fewer children who go unseen. If there's one undeniable lesson in this case, it's this: danger doesn't always wear a warning label. Risk in many households isn't obvious. It hides in routine, in silence, in the belief that everything looks fine from the outside. That's why cases like this must be studied, not just remembered. Prevention isn't a one-time checklist, it's an ongoing commitment. The most effective safety nets start at the ground level, with parents, caregivers, teachers, neighbors, and friends forming a network of support. So how do we move forward? Normalize mental health check-ins for caregivers under stress. Parenting can be overwhelming, and unchecked pressure can lead to irreversible outcomes. Create environments where people can safely speak up. Whether it's a neighbor who notices something off, or a healthcare worker raising a concern, reporting must be free of shame or fear. Remember that even attentive caregivers can reach a breaking point. Community support should focus on recognizing early signs of struggle, not just labeling bad parenting. Equip schools and social programs to spot subtle risks such as shifts in behavior or attendance in siblings and caregivers. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but intervention must come before a child is at risk, not after harm is done. Let this case serve as a mirror, challenging us to examine the systems we build and whether they truly reach those who need them most. Awareness isn't just about the past, it's about creating change now. And the more people who understand that, the fewer names we'll have to say in remembrance instead of celebration. Paris Talley was just 28 days old. She never reached her first milestones, yet her story reminds us what's at stake. These tragedies aren't only about what went wrong, they're about what must go right. Are we aware of the signs of a caregiver in crisis? Would we speak up if something felt off? Each of us can create safer spaces for children and families by checking in, listening, and offering help without judgment. Paris's story doesn't end in the courtroom, it ends with us. Share this message, stay aware, and help protect children who can't protect themselves. Your light saves lives.
She was my grandbaby, and she was the sweetest, kindest, smartest, most full of life little girl that I've ever met in my life. She had her entire life ahead of her.
Police say until today they haven't spoken to Gonzalez, who is legally a minor, but is now being tried as an adult.
We haven't been able to speak with him, so we haven't gotten his story, but from what witnesses have told us, he played a big part in it.
I don't understand how anybody could ever hurt a child. It just makes no sense to me. This is like a nightmare. Nobody's prepared to bury their child ever, especially at the age of 4.
To see a lot of bruising on the child, especially in the neck area. Also human bite marks, which were found to have come from the mother's boyfriend, who is 16 years old.
Tonight, a family is devastated over the loss of their 4-year-old girl after she was found unresponsive Friday and later died.
June 14th, 2024, Evansville, Indiana. It was supposed to be just another summer morning. Sunlight spilled across the floor, the kind of calm that should have meant an ordinary day. But inside the Spring Valley apartments, that calm shattered in an instant. A roommate stepped into the living room and froze. Something about the stillness in the air felt dangerously wrong. On a mattress lay 4-year-old Octavia Aspen Aquino, her small frame unmoving. Beside her sat 16-year-old Christian Trinidad Gonzalez, someone she knew, someone who had been living there for weeks, watching without urgency, without alarm. In that moment, questions began to swirl. How did things reach this point? Why had no one acted sooner? And how could so many warning signs have been missed? By nightfall, detectives would uncover more than a single tragic moment. They would piece together a chain of choices, oversights, and systemic failures, each one allowing a trusted presence to become the greatest threat. Before the day was over, the truth would emerge. This was not only the loss of a child, but the culmination of red flags ignored, opportunities wasted, and a system that failed the one person who needed it most. Before we begin, please be aware, this case involves the loss of a young child, and the events are deeply disturbing. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe and share where you're watching from. It helps us connect with you. And to our returning viewers, your likes, shares, and comments help these stories reach more people and raise awareness. Octavia Aspen Aquino was born on May 10th, 2020 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. From the start, she was the kind of child who drew people in, bright, social, and quick to make friends. She loved being outdoors, running and playing, and at home she could often be found watching her favorite shows, including Paw Patrol and My Little Pony. Those close to her remember her as a child who brought energy and joy into every room she entered. Her parents, Destiny Rhodes and Brandon Aquino, shared the early years of her life together. But the relationship eventually began to break down. Despite being in her mother's legal custody, Octavia spent much of her time with her father's side of the family, especially her grandmother, Linda Alvarez. Linda played a central role in raising her granddaughter, providing stability and consistency during times when her parents' lives were more unsettled. In late 2023, the separation between Destiny and Brandon became permanent. Destiny moved to Evansville, settling into the Spring Valley apartments. She shared the unit with 3 roommates, Carly, Sydney, and Megan, and took a job at a local McDonald's. The arrangement gave her a fresh start, at least on the surface, but it also placed Octavia in a new environment, far from the daily oversight of the family members who had cared for her the most. Though the move changed her surroundings, Octavia remained the same, lively, affectionate child. She enjoyed her visits with her father and grandmother in Fort Wayne, often spending extended time with them. But her new living situation meant she was now more often in the care of her mother and those sharing the apartment. This was the beginning of the change that would quietly set the stage for the horrifying events that followed. In early 2024, a new figure entered the daily life of the Spring Valley apartments. 16-year-old Christian Trinidad Gonzalez, a teenager from Fort Wayne with a history that should have raised serious concern. Earlier that year, he had been reported missing multiple times. On On one occasion, when authorities placed him at the Hillcrest Youth Home for his safety, he left the facility the very same day he was admitted. Court records show that Gonzalez was under a protective order at the time, one that prohibited contact with Destiny Rhodes following allegations involving him and another underage individual. This order was meant to keep distance between the two, yet within weeks, Gonzalez was not only back in touch with Rhodes, he was living in the same apartment as her and her 4-year-old daughter, Octavia Aspen Aquino. By April 2024, his presence in the household had become a regular fixture. To those outside the home, the situation may have appeared casual, even routine. But behind the closed doors of Spring Valley Apartments, the arrangement was a clear violation of court directives and a warning sign that should have triggered immediate intervention. This is where the systemic gap becomes evident. Law enforcement and juvenile authorities were aware of Gonzalez's runaway status. They had prior knowledge of the protective order. Yet, no consistent measures were in place to ensure he was kept away from prohibited contacts or vulnerable environments. Each lapse allowed him to remain in proximity to a child he should never have been near. The danger was not hidden in the shadows. It was sitting openly in a shared living space. And like many cases where harm comes from a trusted individual, the threat didn't appear in the form most people expect. Gonzalez was not a stranger nor an unknown figure. He was someone accepted into the home, someone familiar to its occupants. For those who look at cases like this in hindsight, the lesson is both painful and urgent. Danger does not always come from outside the circle of trust. Sometimes it's already inside. And without decisive action, the risk can grow quietly until it's too late. On the morning of June 13, 2024, the Spring Valley Apartments seemed to follow their usual rhythm. Around 11 a.m., Destiny Rhodes and her roommate Sydney left for their shifts at work, leaving 16-year-old Christian Trinidad Gonzalez in the apartment with 4-year-old Octavia Aspen Aquino. This was not the first time he had been left in charge. When Sydney returned at approximately 2 p.m., she immediately sensed that something was not right. Octavia wasn't her usual energetic self. Instead, she appeared withdrawn, her focus drifting, almost as if she were disconnected from what was happening around her. Sydney noticed visible signs that caused her concern. Faint discoloration on the child's neck, areas of bruising, and a mark on her arm that resembled a bite. When asked about it, Gonzalez dismissed the injuries with a simple explanation. The cat had done it. It was a story he repeated without hesitation. When Sydney turned to Octavia for her version, the little girl quietly, reluctantly echoed the same words, as if rehearsed. Concerned, Sydney and another roommate decided to take Octavia to the McDonald's where Destiny was working. They wanted Destiny to see for herself what they had noticed. In the presence of her mother, Octavia being away from Gonzalez revealed the truth. She said Gonzalez was the one who had bitten her. Destiny confronted Gonzalez directly. He admitted to biting Octavia, but tried to minimize it, claiming it had been a reaction during play or a way to teach her a lesson. The seriousness of what had been said did not translate into decisive action. No one in that moment called for medical help. No one took Octavia to be examined by a doctor. The signs of possible harm were recognized, discussed, and then left unaddressed. By the next morning, she would be fighting for her life, and no doctor had seen her. On the morning of June 14, 2024, the quiet inside the Spring Valley Apartments was interrupted when Carly, one of Destiny's roommates, came downstairs just after 9 a.m. She expected the usual sounds of a household starting its day. Instead, she found 4-year-old Octavia Aspen Aquino lying still on a mattress in the living room. Alarmed, Carly quickly called for the others in the apartment. Sydney and Megan rushed in from upstairs. What they saw stopped them in place. Beside Octavia sat 16-year-old Christian Trinidad Gonzalez, seemingly detached from the urgency of the moment. Instead of showing any sign of action, he remained seated, focused on his phone. Later, investigators would confirm through phone records that during these critical minutes, Gonzalez had been browsing TikTok rather than calling for help. Those moments, when immediate aid could have been sought, slipped away as he stayed silent. Carly and the others knew something was terribly wrong. Emergency services were immediately called, and within minutes, first responders arrived at the apartment. They moved quickly, assessing Octavia's condition and preparing her for transport. She was rushed to a nearby hospital where medical staff began working to stabilize her. The initial reports from the hospital were grim. Octavia's brain activity was minimal, and the medical team understood the severity of her condition. Efforts continued in the hope of reversing the damage, but the signs pointed to a life-threatening situation. Despite the medical team's efforts, Octavia was pronounced dead later that day. The loss sent shockwaves through her family and the wider community, turning the investigation into a case of homicide. In the midst of unimaginable grief, her grandmother and father made the decision to donate her organs. A choice that, while heartbreaking, gave other children a chance at life. For them, it was a way to let a part of Octavia's light live on, even in the darkest moment.
Family continues to grieve. They are also taking time to celebrate Octavia's heroic actions in her final moments.
Now, the 4-year-old was honored by family and hospital staff last night as she prepared to give the gift of life. Eyewitness News' Cody Bailey joins us with that story. Cody.
It was a quiet, somber, and emotional moment last night in Evansville as Octavia Aquino was escorted by loved ones to the operating room where she would perform one final heroic act as an organ donor. On the 4th floor of Ascension St. Vincent Hospital in Evansville, the family of Octavia Aquino say their goodbyes to a life gone too soon. The 4-year-old girl was found unresponsive with bruising and a human bite mark on her arm last Friday before being declared dead on June 16th. We spoke with Octavia's grandmother, Linda Alvarez, on June 17th, who described her granddaughter as joyful.
She was just a ray of sunshine. Like, she made everybody happy. Anybody that she encountered, she was a joy.
On Tuesday night, family members and loved ones took part in Octavia's honor walk, escorting her through the hospital's hallways, lined with staff members and others.
That morning's events would later become a central focus for investigators, not only because of the visible urgency when Carly discovered Octavia, but also because of what had not been done in the moments before. The lack of immediate action from Gonzalez, combined with his earlier unsupervised presence in the home, painted a troubling picture of those final hours inside the apartment. Evansville police began their investigation within hours of the 911 call. Officers first secured the apartment and separated everyone present to take individual statements. Destiny Rhodes was interviewed about the events leading up to the emergency. She acknowledged that her daughter had been in the care of Christian Trinidad Gonzalez the day before, but downplayed concerns about his presence in the home. The 3 roommates, Carly, Sydney, and Megan, each provided their own accounts. Their statements revealed a consistent narrative about what had been seen on June 13th, the visible marks on Octavia, her unusual behavior, and the lack of medical attention despite those warning signs. When it came time to question Gonzalez, investigators immediately encountered resistance. He initially gave a false name and an incorrect age, attempting to obscure his identity and juvenile history. It didn't take long for officers to confirm who he was and that he was under a protective order barring contact with Rhodes. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline. They gathered witness statements, pulled text message records, and examined phone logs. The digital evidence confirmed that on the morning of June 14th, during critical minutes when Octavia was in distress, Gonzalez had been casually scrolling through TikTok without a care in the world, rather than calling for help. A forensic examination was ordered. The medical findings confirmed that Octavia's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and neck. The report also documented injuries consistent with what had been observed the day before. The bite mark, the bruising, and the lack of any medical evaluation after those injuries were discovered. For investigators, the evidence told a clear story. Warning signs had been recognized, but not acted upon. And the person responsible for her care in those final hours had both a history of disregarding the law and an opportunity to seek help that he did not take. If more people understood how quickly neglect can turn into tragedy, more lives could be saved. Like this video so it reaches people who need to hear it. By the end of June 14th, 2024, the investigation had moved swiftly from gathering evidence to making arrests. Detectives, now confident in the timeline and facts, acted on what they had uncovered. Christian Trinidad Gonzalez was taken into custody that same day. His history with law enforcement, the protective order, and the weight of the evidence made the decision immediate. He was booked into the youth care center in Evansville. The charges filed against him were severe: murder, battery causing serious bodily injury, and false informing for providing a fake name and age during questioning. Each charge reflected a different layer of what investigators believed had occurred: the fatal act, the prior harm, and the deliberate attempt to mislead authorities. Attention then turned to Destiny Rhodes. The investigation had shown that she was aware of Gonzalez's presence in the home, despite the court order, and that she had been informed of concerning injuries the day before the incident without seeking medical attention. She was arrested and charged with neglect of a dependent, resulting in death, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and invasion of privacy for violating the terms of the protective order. The speed of the arrests sent a clear message. Investigators believed both the direct actions of Gonzalez and the decisions made by Rhodes had led to a preventable tragedy. These initial charges would set the stage for a legal process that promised to be as closely watched as it was deeply unsettling. The legal process for this case moved forward quickly, reflecting both the seriousness of the charges and the strength of the evidence gathered by investigators. For Christian Trinidad Gonzalez, the path to trial began almost immediately after his arrest. The prosecution presented a case centered on his actions in the hours leading up to the emergency, the opportunities to seek help that he did not take, and the fact that he was in a position of responsibility over a young child despite a protective order. Witness testimony, digital evidence, and prior incidents were all used to build a timeline that prosecutors argued left no doubt about his culpability. On January 10, 2025, the jury returned its verdict. Gonzalez was convicted of murder. Sentencing took place on February 21, 2025, with Judge Robert J. Pigman presiding. Citing aggravating factors, the victim's young age, and Gonzalez's role as a trusted caregiver at the time, the judge imposed a 60-year prison sentence. In addition, Gonzalez was ordered to register as a violent offender, a designation intended to follow him long after his prison term. Prosecutor Diana Moores emphasized that the sentence reflected not only the crime itself, but the calculated decisions that allowed it to happen.
Trial is underway for an Evansville teenager accused of murder in the case of 4-year-old Octavia Aquino. Christian Gonzalez's trial was set to begin on Monday, but was postponed due to the winter storm. Gonzalez is being tried as an adult in Aquino's murder. Last June, Evansville police say they found Aquino unresponsive at the Spring Valley Flats apartment complex. She was taken to the hospital and died 2 days later. Authorities say this is a case of extreme neglect and believe Gonzalez is responsible for her death. Octavia's mother, Destiny Rhodes, is also being charged in her death. Her trial begins in March.
Destiny Rhodes faced a different legal outcome. After months of proceedings, on August 7, 2025, she entered a guilty plea to neglect of a dependent resulting in death. As part of the plea agreement, the other charges against her, contributing to the delinquency of a minor and invasion of privacy, were dismissed. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the final 5 years to be served as non-reporting probation. These court decisions marked the conclusion of the criminal process, delivering formal accountability for both the direct actions of Gonzalez and the omissions by Rhodes that prosecutors argued made the tragedy possible. Cases like this force communities to confront an uncomfortable truth. The warning signs of a child in danger are often visible long before a crisis occurs. They can appear in subtle changes in behavior. A child who was once active and talkative becoming withdrawn, hesitant to play, or showing sudden mood swings. They can also be physical. Unexplained marks, signs of exhaustion, or a general decline in well-being. These signals should never be dismissed as minor or temporary, because for some children, they are the only way they can communicate that something is wrong. Acting on these signs does not require absolute certainty. The role of the community is not to investigate or prove wrongdoing, but to ensure concerns are placed in the hands of professionals who can. Reporting a suspicion, even if it later turns out to be unfounded, is far less harmful than remaining silent when intervention could save a life. This case also highlights the importance of setting and maintaining clear boundaries when someone outside the immediate family is living in a home with children. A parent or guardian should remain aware of the dynamics, routines, and time the child spends with that individual, and ensure that trust is paired with oversight. The responsibility to protect children extends beyond parents alone. Neighbors, friends, extended family members, and even casual acquaintances can play a role in safeguarding a child's welfare. When each person in a community accepts that vigilance is part of their duty, children are less likely to slip through the cracks created by isolation or indifference. Prevention is not a single action. It is a culture built on awareness, communication, and the willingness to speak up. Recognizing the signs, acting without delay, setting healthy boundaries, and fostering a protective network are not just best practices, they are necessary safeguards. In the end, the difference between tragedy and safety can come down to one person choosing to act. Octavia's case stands as a stark reminder of how betrayal of trust can occur within the very spaces meant to offer safety. The lack of enforcement of a protective order, the missed opportunities for intervention by those in her immediate environment, and the absence of a medical assessment when warning signs were present, all combined to create a fatal chain of events. These were preventable failures, not of one moment, but of multiple moments where action could have changed the outcome. Octavia's story is a call to act, not to look away. If you believe change starts with awareness, subscribe and share this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.